Welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name is Joe Buskens, and we are here in our family's boat shop where since the 1960s, our family has built over 300 boats and done countless fiberglass and gel coat repair jobs. And today we're talking about a topic that's going to apply to almost every fiberglass, gel coat, or epoxy job you're ever going to do. And it's kind of one of the more basic things, but it may help solve some problems and trouble when you're doing your next epoxy or fiberglass repair job. And that is, how do we stay clean and how do we clean up our tools after we've done a repair job? So some good PPE is always a good place to start. Now I've got a selection. We've got some very heavy duty work gloves there that you may choose to use, but I typically go with a fairly light duty glove. Matter of fact, I source these from our local Lowe's, but other big box supply places are going to have these. Now you can go to like a fiberglass specialty shop and they have them too. But I'm going to do something you might not expect. I'm going to put 2 pair of gloves on. And that's one of the little tricks of the trade. And I will show you why in just a few minutes. So we're going to move over here. And we work with a lot of polyester resins, but almost everything we're doing would apply with gel coat and epoxy. Today we're going to be using some of the ISO tooling polyester from Fiberglass Warehouse. And we're going to load up a little in a pan. We use pans and rollers quite a bit, and you're applying this on a daily basis. Now we do have some spray equipment and whatnot, but typically we're going to be using, for fiberglass layup, I use a fairly inexpensive, again, this is from Lowe's, this is not a high dollar one, and it's perfectly fine for fiberglass laminating. An inexpensive little chip brush. And I'm not going to catalyze this today. Now normally you would have to add 1 to 2% of MEKP activator to this, but I'm going to recover some of this. I'm going to show you how I would do that. So standard roller, and we're going to load this thing up. I usually like to kind of start at the edge and work it into the roller over several passes and just get a nice even load on this thing. Just as if we were going to be wetting out something. So we got a pretty good load in that. Now, what we work with a lot is going to be CSM or chop strand mat. And this is probably one of the messier fabrics you deal with. It kind of gets all over the place. And a lot of times when you're trying to work with surfaces, you may get some resin on your hands, and you're tearing some of this mat to fit in little corners, or you're tearing little edges, and you're going to get fibers and bits of material all over your gloves. And at some point, your gloves will end up almost looking like this. And I bet a lot of you folks out there that have worked with fiberglass, you're like, holy smokes, I got this stuff everywhere. Now, I tend to keep a trash can really close, and that's one of the reasons we double glove. Once these things just get completely clogged up with fiberglass hairs, it's real easy just to peel that set off, and you don't even miss a beat. You can keep on working, and you still got some protection there. Now we also will use our chip brushes a lot of times, like if we were mixing an activator in, typically we would be using that to agitate and stir the resin. And the brush is really good for tucking into little corners. But a lot of times, if you're not careful and you get carried away with the roller, you forget about the brush, and the brush will get hard. The resin will cure in it. So I usually like to get as much resin by dragging it on the pan, as much resin out of that little brush as I can. And I will have a little small container with some acetone sitting right over here to the side. And I'm using a pint inside of a quart, and that'll keep it from evaporating. And I like to just jog that extra resin out of the brush, just like so. Now, when you're done with the job and you've got the roller here and you've got maybe some excess material in there that you want to get out and maybe use the brush to dab that last little bit, you can use one of these little tools. That is called a 5-in-1 is what I always grew up using these or calling these, and you can find them in the paint section. If you go and ask your hardware guy for a 5-in-1 tool, if you don't own one, you actually need one of these around your house anyway. It's a very, very handy tool. And this curve section right in here is specifically designed to fit the curvature of a paint roller. And it is very easy to take that 5-in-1 when you are all done and get the majority of that resin out of your roller, just like so. Now sometimes I will only do this when we're down to the very end, and you can see we've got the vast majority of that resin out of that roller. And sometimes after a job is done, you may come back and clean out what's in the roller, and you can take your paintbrush and maybe touch up some little spots and clean things up. Now this is another tip that many people struggle with, and we take it for granted because we've been doing this a long time, but you've got this roller on here and you don't want it to seize, you don't want the roller sleeve to seize to your nice roller frame, and you don't want to get this stuff all over your hands, and sometimes it can be a bear to remove that thing. So y'all follow me. Typically what I'm going to do, I've got some little sawhorses around, but any kind of a sharp edge that you can rack this against works just like so. It works amazingly good. Now you've got to be very careful when you've got a roller that's been activated with catalyst and you're done with it. You can build up a pretty tremendous amount of heat in these things, and it can be a fire hazard. So you would never ever want to like do that. Some people might be tempted to use the edge of the trash can, which can work, but you would never want to leave it. Like, let me emphasize, never leave an activated or catalyzed roller in your trash bin because it can be a fire hazard. I typically will leave them out of the shop on some concrete until they have actually kicked off or cured, and then the next day I will throw them away, properly dispose of them, and at that point the material is activated and it's cured and the thing is no longer a hazard. But you're still going to have some residue on your roller frame, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. Now what I like to do is keep a bucket, a 5-gallon bucket of acetone, and again we're using I buy it by the 5-gallon pails, but you can get it at all your local supply places, and a 5-gallon bucket is perfect for just sloshing your roller around in and keeping things nice and clean. Now I want everyone out there to remember that acetone is highly flammable, and typically when I'm working with this stuff, we're going to be using a really good respirator, a high quality respirator, and some eye protection, some good PPE everywhere is super important. Now, a lot of times in the boat shop, we're doing this so much that I will have like a clean bucket, and then sometimes if we don't want to spend a lot of time, or if we've got some tools that we're using on a daily basis, I will have a second bucket that a lot of times we will have really fresh acetone in one bucket and we'll have older acetone in another, and that way we're not throwing away or losing much acetone. Sometimes you need some cleaner material to work with, but once that gets dirty, we'll cycle that over into our second bucket and it still has some use there. Now, y'all will notice this little grooved roller that we use a lot of times. It's called a bubble buster. Sometimes when you're trying to work the bubbles out of fiberglass, it works really good. But sometimes these things will get sticky and tacky, or your hands will get sticky and tacky in the middle of fiberglassing. And I have found that if you take a Gatorade, it's a standard Gatorade bottle, and drill about a 1/16 hole, just a tiny hole in there. Now y'all notice I put acetone toxic on there. I've had some comments before, people are like, hey, having a bottle like that around the shop, you want to be sure it's marked properly so someone doesn't mistake it for an actual Gatorade. Other containers may work, but I know for a fact these will hold acetone and not melt. Now a lot of times you can be rolling the glass and the glass will get a little bit sticky, or you'll get some material on the handle. I will put it down in the, aim it into the bucket, and that way you're recovering your acetone And you can wash these little rollers a little bit with just this little squeeze bottle there. Again, you want some PPE. You want to be sure you're being careful with that when you're using it. And then obviously acetone evaporates very rapidly, so it needs to always have a cap on it. Matter of fact, even like this one here, once we've cleaned that brush thoroughly, I have found that you can put a pint back into the quart and you can save your acetone from evaporating. Now, another way for you folks at home to save on cleanup time, which that's one reason we use a lot of times just the cheap, inexpensive brushes, is because it's better just to get the resin out of them and discard them than to spend a lot of time and a lot of money on expensive rollers, especially for fiberglass work. We use a lot of these little disposable, I call them waxed, like a popcorn cup. And these are disposable as well. So you're gonna spend $2 or $3 a piece for like these little graduated mixing cups, and sometimes you just don't need those. And these are super handy. You can use them once and you can discard them, and it makes cleanup super easy. Now, another item in the shop that if you don't use these, we use rolls and rolls of, we just call them shop towels or a mechanic's towel. And I am constantly using these for wipe down and cleanup of things. Matter of fact, many times we'll take one, and if you've got to wipe a surface down, very convenient to take your little acetone dispenser. You've got a little bit of acetone on a rag, and let's just say this 5-in-1 tool here, you could of course clean that in the bucket, but sometimes a rag with some acetone in it is a good way to clean up. Now, once again, you would not want to throw these solvent saturated rags in a trash can. You want to make sure they dry out somewhere or place them in a container that's designed to handle or hold hazardous materials. Now, of course, there's other things like big full face mask and Tyvek suits are very handy. But quite honestly, in our part of the world, it is routinely in the 90s, and humidity is usually in the 90s as well. And Tyvek suits and all of that are just really, really, really uncomfortable and hot. So you tend to learn how to keep this stuff off of you as best you can and work really neat and clean. The cleaner and neater you can work, the easier cleanup is going to be. The more you're going to enjoy working with composites and fiberglass and these kind of materials. Now, when I'm all done, y'all will notice I've got multiple trash cans here, but at the end of the job, it is a very easy matter. Now, this one you can see I double gloved, but very easy matter just to deglove, and you can remain amazingly clean if you use a few of these little tips and techniques that we've showed today. So I hope this little video was helpful. We're going to try to do a little bit more of this kind of stuff. I actually had some requests for how do I clean up and some things I use. And I do read the comments. So if I missed something here, I will try to touch on it on the next video. So you guys know how much I appreciate everyone out there taking their time to watch the channel. The channel's been growing rapidly, and it's all because of you folks out there. And I appreciate it very, very much. So it's Captain Joe here with Island Marine Charters, Fish Bump TV here on YouTube. My son as my amazing cameraman there behind the scenes. And we will catch you folks in the next episode.